So how does housing, I guess is the premise of our conversation, and thankfully we have a lot of time, well, an hour and a half roughly, and we're going to try and get as many of your questions to our panels as possible. But here's the premise, I guess, of our conversation. How does housing fit into the broader debate over poverty, racial segregation, and educational segregation? And I want to start by just borrowing something, a review of Richard Rothstein's book. To scholars and social critics, the racial segregation of our neighborhoods has been viewed as the result of unscrupulous real estate agents, unethical mortgage lenders, and illegal exclusionary covenants. But in case after case, Mr. Rothstein showed how government policies were complicit in creating and allowing such segregationist practices. So, I will pose this question and let Megan start us off with a big picture. If that's the case, if Mr. Rothstein's argument and his research points to institutionalized racism really at the root of our segregationist policies, what makes us think, what makes you think that we can undo this? And where do we begin? Given your experience, your research, where do we begin?
Well, thank you for the question, Claudio, and thank you so much to Housing Works for having me here today. I want to give everybody just a little bit of, before I tackle the question, I want to give everybody a little bit of background about the Urban Institute. We are a research organization in Washington, D.C., whose mission is to open minds, shape decisions, and offer solutions for social and economic policy problems. Our philosophy is to elevate the debate using evidence to shape policy decisions. So at the Urban Institute, I have the privilege of working in two of our policy areas. One of our policy areas being education, and one being in housing and community development. So I have the unenviable job of actually trying to get our researchers to talk to each other. So I really understand how the work in the field is often so siloed, the funding is so siloed, the solutions then end up being so siloed. And so I really think that this panel is a great opportunity for us to really think and talk about solutions that bridge the silos. And so just to turn back to Claudio's question, I think what Richard Rothstein really asks us to do is to recognize and internalize the notion that government had a huge role in creating the segregated communities that we have today. And I think for a lot of us who work in public policy and who even maybe implement policy, this is a really difficult realization. And something that should give us pause as we think about solutions for the future. What I think that he calls us to do is to really think about systems level solutions and not just programmatic solutions. And so I think this really requires us to think about aligning those systems, the housing and education systems, more closely than we have ever done before, so that we're encouraged, incentivized to do the right things in our communities.
Sondra,
Yeah.
you're a case study of how, at least in Minnesota, you have begun to address these issues.
Yeah.
Tell us more about that.
Yeah, thank you so much, Claudio, and everybody in Housing Works for having me as well. And Megan, I know she's studied my work, So great to have you here. I do want to take a little speaker privilege and just, if we could, Claudio, for one moment, just remember Nate Woods, who was, and I think it's very appropriate that we remember Nate Woods right now, because as we talk about housing segregation, we're talking about racialized segregation, we're talking about racism, structural, persistent, historical racism, and white supremacy, not just white supremacy, but white body supremacy.
We're talking about the young man who was just executed.
Yep, I'm going to get to that. White body supremacy in terms of all bodies, the value of all life, the judge, the standard being the white body. You know, Ta-Nehisi Coates said, a young man who feared for his life in terms of the police said, if the color of my skin looks like a weapon, I'm always armed. And so Nate was murdered last night. He was killed by the state, the government. So here it is, it's all connected. He was killed by his government. The governor of the state of Alabama would not stay his execution. He was executed at 9:38. He was not pronounced dead until 10:01. And those were 23 grueling minutes. And this is a man who, by all accounts, was innocent. Even the man who killed the police officers testified that Nate had nothing to do with it. He said he ran when he started shooting him, the actual murderer. So anyway, if we could, because I think this is so connected to the conversation that we're having right now, and as one of our speakers said earlier, as we talk about housing segregation, its impact on education, if we could also know the continuity of the impact on human lives of men and women who the only difference is we have a different color skin. So if we could, even just for 30 seconds, Claudio.
Of course.
Thank you. I have no idea what his family is going through, but I do know what families are going through this country because of the housing policies and what we're trying to do in North Minneapolis. A couple things about me, by the way. I was born in 1965 in Newark, New Jersey, in the same hospital as Queen Latifah and Whitney Houston. I didn't get there. Yeah, hey. I didn't get their talent, but I do rap. And my family was part of fair housing legislation. 1968 was passed, and in 1970 we were part of the exodus out of the inner city of African Americans who now had the legal right to move in suburban areas. And I got to tell you, it was hellish for me growing up and integrating the schools that I integrated. And I will tell you that we left a lasting impact on Newark, New Jersey, because my middle-class family wasn't the only middle-class family that exited. And certainly before us, all the white folks had moved. And by the way, when we moved to the suburb of Newark called Scotch Plains, New Jersey, when we moved on our block in like 1970, 1972, we were the first black family on that block in the suburbs. There was even a welcome wagon that came to our door, and I had never seen a welcome wagon in Newark. And within 5 years, the block was all black and one white family. So this is something that's been going on for a long, long time. We've just been fleeing. We've been fleeing racially. We've been fleeing economically. That is the case in North Minneapolis. And in fact, and my husband and I live there. North Minneapolis is disproportionately African American. We're about 50%. And I will tell you that our neighborhood where we moved to, and by the way, we had to fight to move there. No realtor wanted to show us North Minneapolis because they knew we were educated and we were looking to have a family. So they all talked about not just the housing, but the schools. But anyway, we've been there for 20-something years, 23 years. But the 2000 census, the neighborhood was 75% white, 25% African American, or 65% white, 25% African American, and certainly there were other racial groups. 10 years later, it was 65% black, 25% white, and other racial groups. And so here we are with a very segregated neighborhood, and all of the thing for me in terms of what Richard talked about today is, yes, this is a housing conference, and we are talking about how racial segregation has impacted education, and it's not just housing segregation. And I would submit that even before housing segregation, schools were never made for black and brown children. And so for me, it's not either or, it's both and. In terms of the intersectionality of our discrimination in this country, it's deep. And so yes, we can trace, and by the way, somebody asked me the other day, how do we end racism in the country? That's a loaded question, and I am not God. But what I do know is a big path to undoing it is understanding history, right? Because then no longer can you have the same excuses. But anyway, so here we are in North Minneapolis, segregated community, worst outcomes for scholars. We call all our babies scholars. The Northside Achievement Zone, and in fact, can you go ahead and put the slide up, and I'll tell you a little bit about the work. Northside Achievement Zone is made up of 40, and you can click to the next one. It's made up of 40 nonprofit organizations that have come together with one population level result, and that is ending generational poverty in our community using whole family support and education. So the 40 nonprofits are made up of housing, career organizations, health, early childhood programs, K through 12 schools, colleges, and then we do a whole host of parenting education classes. Parenting education is important, especially and along with all of the government and policy decisions that need to happen. Martin Luther King said, if you're not bent over, nobody can walk on your back. One of the education programs that we do is called College-Bound Babies, and it's for our parents who are isolated and segregated in North Minneapolis, for them to get the same knowledge and tools that many white families in suburban communities learned about 20 years ago around brain development, how 80% of the brain is developed by the time a baby is 3. And in fact, for one of our classes, I always bring this, when the parents graduate from College-Bound Babies, and it's for parents who have children 0 to 3, the babies graduate too. And this is a t-shirt that says college graduate. And this is when our youngest scholar, we call all our babies scholars to get at the belief gap, will graduate from a 4-year college. And so all of the partners are working together, and housing is a huge piece, stabilizing a family in order so the child can focus, so they're not couch hopping, right? And I could tell you some stories around the couch hopping and the housing situation, the number of predatory landlords that we have in our community that keep dilapidated properties. I mean, I could go on, but we have come together, we've broken up our silos because we know that we can only address the issues of education, of housing, of jobs, of health together. And we know how intersected they are. And what I will tell you, if you could flip to the next slide, this is really our theory of change. So while we're looking at, we want to impact the whole city of Minneapolis, our target population, though, is African American families in North Minneapolis, because when the city gets it right by us, all the water rises for everyone. And we're measuring all the academic progress of children from womb all the way to work and college. And at the bottom is our core strategies around how we get that done. And again, it's housing, it's health, it's jobs, it's community wellness. And we've been at this now for about 10 years. We received $28 million from the Obama administration to scale up our work through a program called Promise Neighborhoods. That $28 million finished. It was for 5 years in 2016. And I will tell you that 4 years out of that grant, our community is still going strong. My partners are still coming to the table, and our results are showing that when we work together, and by the way, it's both program and system, because we can't program our way out of the intractability of these issues of race as a country. It's got to be both and that's happening, and that really gets into what Richard was talking about. That's so exciting for me.
Sure, big applause. I have more specific questions based on the little bit I know about Minneapolis, St. Paul area. But I do want to go back to the question of what you called the silos. that often is a feature of research. Does the research help inform model programs or people like Sondra who are working in the trenches literally and who want to proceed with the best research at hand? And I don't know what that relationship is really like. I often find it, that research is sometimes couched in such academic language that it's like you might as well be talking to a Martian. Because the language used to describe conditions or policies doesn't always filter down or up or in any direction to the people who need that research most. How would you describe, I'll ask you first, Megan, how would you describe the research and the impact it could have on model programs like Sondra's?
That's a good question. So at the Urban Institute, we have an interesting sort of funding model where some of our work is really philanthropically funded and sort of motivated by the researchers' interests and what they see out in the field as interesting issues to sort of dig into. Another part of our model is actually about technical assistance to communities who are working on the ground. And the cool opportunity is for those pieces of our work to inform one another. So I actually work a lot with the Promised Neighborhood communities, which is how I met Sondra before. And it really gives us an opportunity to hear the issues that they're struggling with locally, to lift up those issues and look across our teams and identify other places across the country that have struggled with the same issues, and to bring those relationships and connections together so that localities can learn from one another. That work is actually funded by the U.S. Department of Education, and through the Promised Neighborhoods grant, which is still alive, which is really exciting. Promised Neighborhoods is a place-based initiative, and the idea is that place-based initiatives are really good for solving problems that are very spatially concentrated. And so the Northside Achievement Zone was a perfect place for a place-based initiative because of the concentrated disadvantage in that community.
Sondra, do you consider your project in Minneapolis and Minnesota a model? I mean, could you hypothetically lift that program and plop it down in Atlanta or Austin? I mean, is that the way it works? Because it seems to me that what you're describing and what you showed us on your graphics are very specific conditions under which you've worked, specific to your community, that may or may not translate into something in Austin or Atlanta or Phoenix.
Financially, we have like 17, 19 Fortune 500 corporations in the Twin Cities, Target, General Mills, 3M, and so on. And so who have been very generous in supporting our work because they've seen outcomes, that kids who are in the Northside Achievement Zone, in NAS, getting the support that we provide in terms of wraparound support for both families and children, are statistically doing better. It's significant in terms of their outcomes academically, right? And so we're getting all of that support. And when I travel around, people come visit us in Northside Achievement Zone as well. And some of my colleagues in Mississippi will say, hey, I'm in Indianola, we don't have one corporation that can support our work, right? Because the revolution has to be funded. And so that is a piece of it. But a bigger piece is the siloing that happens on the ground level, and families and children don't come in pieces. So why do we have solutions that are segregated and siloed? It doesn't work. And that's why we have what we have today. And so the model of a community's adults, because we don't have a child problem, we have an adult problem. And the achievement gap is not about black and brown kids not being able to learn. It's about us, the adults, having a gap because we educate white, middle class, and upper class kids really well, and we do a sorry job with black and brown kids. And so when you break the silos and the adults start playing well together in the sandbox across housing and education and careers and early childhood, then you have a force to be reckoned with. Because finally, we understand. So the truth is, none of us got to where we are in a silo, right? We all had support. And that's what I love about living in North Minneapolis, is that me and my neighbors know that we need each other, right? And that's the only difference, is that the community that I'm in, of other nonprofit leaders and policymakers, we understand that we need each other. That can absolutely be scaled, and that can absolutely be replicated, and it is happening.
We're going to get to some we're going to get to some questions from the audience in just a couple of minutes, because I do want that to drive much of the conversation here. But let me just, on my end, throw out some stuff. And this is, I mean, you know, I spent months working on desegregation, explicit desegregation issues in Louisville, in Anaheim, California, Louisville, Kentucky, Charlotte, Mecklenburg, and Boston. This was years ago. And I went back to some of those stories, and I remember just looking at some bullets that I had jotted down from my reporting.
And Claudio, was that deseg in terms of schools or
School
housing?
desegregation.
Got it.
Right.
Got it.
With its
Yes.
implications
Got it.
certainly
Got
affected
it.
by housing. So, ripple effects of housing segregation
Yes.
in bullet form. Concentrated poverty, multi-generational poverty, crime, violence plagued neighborhoods, struggling schools, racialized, polarized politics. Working class blacks and Latinos were more likely to live in high poverty neighborhoods than whites earning $20,000.
Yeah.
Schools in high poverty neighborhoods are more poorly funded because of the reliance on property taxes and the way we fund our schools. And the courts have done little to equalize funding. So I say this because I don't think there's any part of this country where we don't see the effects of this
Yeah.
on children,
Yeah.
including Minneapolis
Absolutely.
and St. Paul. I did stories about how St. Paul was ground zero for the charter school movement.
Yeah.
The very, very
Started
first,
there. It was birthed
1992, the
there.
very first
Yeah.
charter school legislation.
Minnesota.
Fast forward to today.
Yeah.
The charter school issue has become racially polarized.
Yes.
You have black parents who say, I don't care about the busing or about the public school down the street that
Yep.
doesn't
Yep.
educate my child.
Yep.
Give me the choice.
Hallelujah.
That has split the NAACP. It has split Latino parents.
Yep.
Because there is this deep sense that by giving charter schools like Minneapolis, St. Paul's, a road, a path, you are defunding public education, the traditional public school
Yep,
that
yep.
educates 90%
Yep.
of black and Latino children.
Yep.
So,
I love this question. Love this question. Let me start by saying this.
okay.
I worked for Ford Motor Company when I graduated from my second historically black college and university, Atlanta University, at Clark Atlanta University. That's how I got to Minnesota. And in fact, the only thing I knew about Minneapolis was Prince. It was like, but anyway, but there I was. And I worked for Ford Motor Company, and this was 1989, and that is just when, in the late 80s, when Asian companies started kicking our tails in terms of the auto industry. Ford, GM, Chrysler, they didn't know what happened to them. And as a zone manager, my job, I used to actually go into Toyota and I was a mystery shopper. Like I would pretend to buy a vehicle just so I knew what their selling points were, what was the torque on the vehicle, because it was like all the auto manufacturers said, Asian companies will not steal the American market from us over our dead bodies. We're going to do whatever it takes to make sure we keep our market share. So they had a profit motive, right? But here we are with education. And we say, it is like, well, first of all, we say, it would be like Ford. I was with Ford at the time. Oh, that daggone Toyota, why do they keep doing this? Could the country just block Toyotas so nobody can choose a Toyota? We know it's a superior product, or that choice makes our product better, but damn it, let's get rid of it. That's what we're doing with education. So in the city of Minneapolis, what I've been saying lately is and by the way, Minneapolis, Minnesota, and Minnesota generally, we have some of the highest ACT scores. We have some of the highest graduation rates. The reason Target, General Mills, and General Mills and 3M are there is not because of our beachfront property or our nice weather. They're there because we have historically had the most educated workforce. And of course, the state is still incredibly homogenous, as well as the city. It's getting more and more diverse. But what I've been telling them lately is that if 79% of white kids were not reading at grade level in the city of Minneapolis, and if 82% were not doing math at grade level in the city of Minneapolis, we would have burned down the school district by now. We would have said, no way can all of our precious white babies fail like this. But because they're black and 72% can't read at grade level and 79%, 82, it's not an emergency. And so this argument around, so as a black parent, I need every choice available to me because America has never been about my children. And so to say we don't get choice, or, charter schools are going to steal our babies that's my choice as a parent. And oh, by the way, a lot of black parents actually make a decision to put their child into an all-black school because they want their psyche. They want who they are as an African-American child and their identity not to be assaulted every time they show up. And so to take that away, the argument is not black and white. I'm 54. I know y'all, black don't crack. You didn't know that. But it is not either or, it's both and. We have to stop this and allowing people to put us in boxes around that choice. And I will say that the NAACP is wrong. They're wrong, straight up. To take away a parent's choice and efficacy around where I send my children. And let me just say this. Right now, we are embroiled in the biggest battle in Minneapolis. It is so good, it's not even funny. And I'm calling it our own Katrina. The Minneapolis Public School District is going bankrupt. In 5 years, they will have not a lick of money, okay? One of the reasons they're going bankrupt, you know why? Okay, I just gave you the numbers, right? And by the way, Minnesota is 50th out of 50 states in graduating black children on time from high school. And of course, we know high school graduation is a lagging indicator. In fact, kindergarten readiness is a lagging indicator. But anyway, so the district is going bankrupt. They're going bankrupt because black families, largely from my neighborhood, no longer send their kids to Minneapolis public schools because they ain't cray-cray. Okay, and so the district has to do something to get them back. And so right now, the district is saying, the superintendent came out in the paper and said, and they're finally willing to face the racial disparities because of the financial bankruptcy that they're about to hit. And I like the superintendent, and whatever it takes, again, this is our Hurricane Katrina, so to speak. He said in the paper, I am a superintendent of the entire district, and if you are a black child, you have 50% chance of being educated in Minneapolis. That's
a hell of a quote.
You see what I'm saying? And so they have this whole district redesign. In fact, Tuesday, I got to go back and be part of the fighting to get it passed, where they are saying, one, they want to desegregate the schools, and they're not going to do it any longer on the backs of black and brown kids from my neighborhood. Now they are trying to say, we have schools that should be tracked to North High School, which is, and when I say north, just think black, okay? So there are schools that should be tracked to North Minneapolis, but instead are going to a more affluent part of Minneapolis in terms of Southwest High School. North High, Southwest High, white school that should be tracked there. It's 2 miles away from North High, but the parents, the affluent white parents, decades ago, got the school district to bus them 5-something miles away to the white high school. So the deseg is about changing those boundaries so those white kids have to actually go to North High. And then changing the outcomes for students at North High. Right now, North High has 12 advanced classes. Southwest High School has 63. Magnet schools are located in South and Southwest Minneapolis, and all my folks live up north. You know, experienced teachers. So here's the thing, what I'm talking about, the intersectionality. If every system did its job and did right by brown and black people, we could go home. We have, because of the teachers union, and I love unions. If there are any teachers in the class, I suckled on the nipple of a union. That's how my family became middle class. My dad was a longshoreman. But because of the teachers union, 2 things. We can't get black and brown teachers. In the state of Minnesota, 95% of the teaching corps are white. In my neighborhood, 85% of the teaching corps is white, and 90% of the kids are kids of color. And all the stats say, and here's another thing around segregation, but all the stats say that if a black child has 1 black teacher in their trajectory, that they are statistically more likely to go to college and complete. But if we have LIFO, last in, first out, every time we grow up a cadre of black and brown teachers and there's a budget cut, they're the first ones to go. And then because of seniority, white senior teachers have a choice of where they work in the district. They don't want to teach our kids. And so North Minneapolis, you know the average tenure of our teachers? 2 years.
Wow.
South and Southwest, 8.
I think nationally it's closer to 5.
Yeah.
Yeah. I guess my question for you, Megan, is how do you bottle all that? And how do you put it into usable,
To bottle that.
user-friendly research that, again, conveys not just the passion, but I mean the right and wrong of it all?
So we follow, so it's so important that there's evidence for policy
Yes,
decisions,
absolutely.
right? So one of the most compelling new studies about the benefits of desegregation came from Rucker Johnson at UC Berkeley. And he produced a book last year called Children of the Dream. And for the first time, he looked at all of the segregation, the desegregation court orders from across the country in a giant, enormous longitudinal data set, and used all that variation in where and when and for whom and how much to identify the causal benefit of desegregation. And it shows that by the 1980s, our graduation rates for white boys and black boys were converging. They were like very, very close to meeting each other. But then, when the court orders were stopped and rendered illegal, all of that work went away. And all of those benefits for future students and future generations went away. And what you see are bigger gaps and more segregated schools right now than back in 1970. So so I think, thinking about how long we need to try things, and how they don't always, in the short run, produce the result you want, and it doesn't mean that you need to change course quickly, especially if you're making long-term investments in children and communities.
Yeah, could we start getting some of the questions from the audience, Slido?
And Claudio, can I
Yeah.
just, with Megan, in terms of Urban Institute, one of the ways that the research they do helps those of us on the ground doing the work every day is when they can hold up best practice, right? And so when they can do that, and we can, because we've used your research around the work that we're doing collaboratively across the state for policymakers to say, look, this is what Urban Institute said. And now that we're in such a much more data-driven, show me the research kind of environment, it makes all the difference around our sustainability.
So let's go to some of the questions, and I'll just begin from the top. I think one of the first ones that I saw first was, let's just go to how do you balance the housing desegregation with maintaining a community's culture and limiting displacement gentrification? Who wants to take that one?
Yeah, I don't know if you can balance it. Quite frankly, I mean, it's the tension I stand in is our neighborhood is gentrifying. We're in North Minneapolis, is very close to downtown. It is, you can, from my attic, which I call my penthouse, I can see downtown when the trees are bare. And so it is a place that more and more white families are moving in, and more black families who are low income can't afford to live. And so we fight for more affordable housing, but then you're increasing segregation. And when, again, what I believe is that it is both and, that you have affordable housing, that you spread it out in inner ring suburbs and other communities, and you make the communities that people live in affordable as well, that you don't just stop that, because we don't have enough of it in North Minneapolis, but I'd like to share the love, right? And so, but that also means that there's got to be, that we're going to lose a little something in that happening, but I'm hoping that we gain much more.
Can there be a balance?
I guess I'd say that affordable housing preservation efforts are incredibly important. And so understanding where and how much affordable housing your community has today, and making sure that that doesn't slip. So you're looking for your, for your multifamily buildings that are coming up, at the end of their leases, and you're making sure that tenants are engaged and protecting those leases from turning over.
There's a question addressed, I think, to you, Sondra. The question of whether technical education and trade schools have a place in the overall educational opportunities in places like Minneapolis.
Yeah, did a white person ask that question? No, I'm serious. No, and because I often do get it from a white person in the audience who say, and this might not be the spirit of this one, but let me tell you what usually goes along with that. College is not for everyone. And so why are you just holding up a college, a 4-year degree, when there's so many other opportunities in the technical field and so on and so forth? And what I will say is that, how many of you in here have kids? Okay, did you, when they were born, as you kind of think about their future, did you just say, oh, boo-boo, I can't wait for you to go to VOTEC. Oh, boo-boo, I can't wait for you to go to the military. We usually have these aspirations for our kids that they will go as far as their intellectual efficacy will take them, right? And most middle class and upper class black, white, brown families want a 4-year education for their child. But as soon as we start talking about low-income black and brown kids, then we start talking about VOTEC and technical. And that in itself is racist. But what I will say is that our goal is for our babies to get a quality education, which, by the way, the Federal Reserve in Minneapolis is trying to help us do. I want to talk about that later, Claudio, if we get a chance. That they get this robust education, and that when they get to 12th grade, if they choose to do vo-tech or technical, which are amazing opportunities, that it becomes a piece of their choice, the plethora of choices that they have available to them. But they could do anything that they chose to do. Right now, it's not a choice. By 3rd grade, they are tracked into who's going to a 4-year college and who maybe go to vo-tech, maybe get a 2-year degree. And what we are trying to say is it's been too long, and my generation as African Americans, when my dad and my mom were told that they were not college material, that's the other part of the work that we're trying to do, is dispel that notion that black and brown kids are not college material. And so if we do that by putting the moon all the way up here and saying you can graduate from a 4-year college, and they choose to do something else, hallelujah, we've done our job.
I agree with you wholeheartedly, but let me suggest that there's a new dynamic in post-secondary education world, which is affordability, not just access. And that is having a really interesting impact, not just on everybody.
Yep.
Black, white, poor, rich. Because it says a college education, a 4-year degree, may not be worth the money it takes to acquire that 4-year degree. Now, I've talked to many working class and poor black and Latino families who say, even if my child's getting a decent education and aspires to a 4-year education, I don't know whether it's worth it. So it's almost like relinquishing that dream, that aspiration, especially if you're first generation, first one in your family to go on to a 4-year school, at a time when the whole economic model for higher ed is under siege and getting worse. I guess my question then is, how do you balance the affordability issue with the aspirational issue? Because the Department of Education is not going to lend you the money you need to go to a school these days.
Yeah.
You're going to have to pay out of pocket. And we know that 40% of kids who say, I'm on my way to state university or a selective college, by summer's end, because those families don't have the out-of-pocket expenses, they don't go. I mean, it's almost like a pre-dropout.
Right. So, yeah, Claudia, I totally get you. And for me, that's not a reason to tell my babies that a 4-year college is not capable, they're not capable of that, or like we'll find a way. In Minneapolis anyway, and it might be different some other places. So we have about 1,000 families, 2,200 scholars, 0 to 18, and 74% of our families make $30,000 or less. Okay, 74 make $30,000 or less. Right now in Minneapolis, if you are low income, you can go to college for free. We have something called The Choice is Yours. You start off as at a 2-year college, and then you can matriculate to a 4-year. Not enough of our kids actually get to qualify for it or benefit from it because many of them don't have a solid high school diploma, and then they get to a 2-year college and they have to take remedial courses and then drop out. But all the data is real around the gap between 4-year college educated kids and those without. It's still a superior in terms of income, in terms of job security. It's still, the data all says that with a 4-year degree, you do better, and so we're gonna still hold that up and work on affordability. So for me, again, I'm just gonna keep getting at both and.
Yeah.
But I wanna hold up everything that's possible for our children, because that's never been held up here in America.
Here's a fascinating question for both of you that I'd like you both to chime in on. Desegregation is often paired with the expectation that minorities assimilate into white culture.
Yeah.
How do we continue desegregation efforts without forced assimilation? Who wants to take that first? That's a tough question.
Yeah, so here's where, so again, we don't have a child problem, we have an adult problem, right? When we talk about dropout, when we talk about how they're performing, it is a report card on us. And so one of the things that we do in the Northside Achievement Zone, because again, all of my 85% of the kids and families that we work with are African American, right? But the majority of the teachers in the schools are white. So one of the things that we're doing is we're focusing on the teachers. And we actually have the schools that we work with. We work with 4 schools. And by the way, the schools that we, 5 schools. The schools that we work with are public district, public charter, and we threw in a Catholic one too. You know, all for, so that parents could all have choice. And we have our educators going through racialized trauma training that gives them the history of historical, persistent, generational, and systemic racism and how it plays itself out in how they teach and who they teach. And I will tell you that some of the white teachers, and they're largely middle-class white women that we work with, say that they feel like they understand themselves better and their own triggers, and also the children that they're educating. And so I think that the work is, with DSEG, is about adults.
Does that include what you do there? Does that include kind of exposing teachers, white teachers, female teachers, to the living conditions under which these kids, many of these kids, come from?
That's the goal.
And see, to me, it's like, because I've met
Yep.
many white teachers who
Yep.
have no clue
And none.
no clue.
None.
of the conditions under which many of
Right.
these kids are living.
Right.
And I'm not talking about extremes. I'm just talking about
Yeah.
I know the question was for you.
Yeah, and
No,
let
no,
me
no, I
just
wanted
say,
you
no,
to
Megan,
vote.
you can go too. One of the other things that we do, so you're absolutely right. I know, and understanding who you're teaching is critical. We actually do bus tours in North Minneapolis where I take, a lot of times it's funders and people that we want to invest in our work and so on around North Minneapolis. And I give the history, the present conditions. They see houses where a 3-year-old was shot when a bullet came through the house. You know, we talk about all of the issues of the community. And we've been doing those bus tours for the teachers that are teaching in our schools now. And many of them have never, ever even driven through the neighborhood.
Well, I've done stories where close to 80% of an inner city school, the teaching staff, the faculty, 80% don't live remotely close.
Oh, yeah, that's
the
the,
community
that's
where
the,
they're-
that's the
you
case
know,
for
where the
us
kids
too.
are coming from.
Yeah, that's the case.
So again, it's Martian and, you know,
And so we
a
have
Martian
to do
coming in.
things to bring them in, right? Because
Yeah.
we're not getting rid of all the teachers overnight, nor would I want to. I do want to brown it up a bit, but anyway.
Right.
So there are actually legal limitations to what teachers are allowed to know about students' living conditions. And
I didn't know that.
yeah, so in a lot of my work, I work with housing authorities and school districts or schools to kind of work together more tightly to serve the students that live in the housing authority developments. And one of the big challenges is that it is presumed to disadvantage the child if the teacher knows that the child is living in public housing or is homeless. And so you
Because
have...
there's a danger they'll be more empathetic? I mean, I don't get that.
Like
There
that's
is these rules exist, and they create barriers, protections, or barriers for teachers and students. So
I wonder whether unions have a role in that.
I don't know.
I mean, there are limitations on, you know, how involved teachers can get that I know have their roots in union contracts. But my gosh, I would be so surprised if, because to me it's ironic, the one adult in that child's life other than parents
Right.
who has a role in the formation
such a
of that
long
child
time.
is deprived of understanding and having any insight into that child's whole life. Why would that be?
Yeah, but and they know, even if they haven't gone home, they know who's homeless. There's we have family achievement coaches that we hire full-time from the neighborhood, and they are located within the schools. So one school will have 4 family achievement coaches, so they're all African-American. They might be some of the only African-Americans in the building, except for the behavioral, person. They always have the behavioral person be a black person. But anyway, they are able, the teachers know the kids who take a cab in the mornings. And they take a cab in because they're at a homeless shelter. They know the ones who their uniforms are not clean, if the school has uniform. So they already know. The thing that we have to guard against is the stereotyping. So therefore Jamal cannot learn because Jamal is poor, because Jamal is homeless, and the thing is that is just, is it harder? Absolutely. Do we have a school system that's still based on an agrarian calendar that is so antiquated that it is just shameful? Yes, we do. And if we were to change our school system, especially in the urban core, to fit, well, also in the rural areas as well, to fit the student of today with their needs of today, we would have vastly different outcomes.
There's a couple more interesting questions, but just to piggyback on what we were talking about, and that very provocative term about assimilation, forced assimilation. I remember a story that we were doing about Head Start in New Haven, where, at Yale University, Edward Ziegler, one of the founders of the Head Start program back in the 60s, was up in arms about how that community was dealing with the Head Start program, because most of those programs were in literally the basements of housing projects. Yeah. And he felt that it was not a very conducive environment. Yes, it was convenient because that's where the families were, but there were facilities and there were opportunities outside of those housing projects that were far superior. I mean, better, more light, more resources.
Right.
There was criticism of that view, that they should be taken out of that environment, these housing projects, into facilities at Yale, for example. Because parents felt, I don't want my child to begin to act white.
Right.
What do we do, or have you seen that dynamic of families who feel that for all the good things that might happen to your child, because they have access to a good program in a nice part of town, that you begin to fear its impact on that child's black identity, or Latino identity for that matter?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. In fact, I'm personally going through that right now. A young man that was all of my 3 girls are away at school. One actually is not in school. She stopped out. She didn't drop out yet. She stopped out. But a young man is living with us, and he's from the neighborhood. He was in Naz. We met him because they lived on our block. But anyway, he's staying with us now. And our children have never been in a Minneapolis public school, right? And we've been able to exercise that choice because of the money we have, who we are in community, right? And a lot of my neighbors have not had that choice in the same way, even though Minneapolis is a choice city. But anyway, they've been in district school, but not in North Minneapolis. Anyway, so the young man lives with us now, and we asked his mom if he could and stay with us so that he could go to the same Catholic high school our girls graduated from. And his dad was murdered in North Minneapolis. His uncle was murdered in North Minneapolis. There's a lot of challenges and drama, which is real. And by the way, I never want to make it seem like some of the issues of poverty are not real and don't impact education in a significant way, and also impact housing. So I've been influential in getting a couple families evicted in terms of on our block who were selling drugs and doing things of that nature. But that's just, I mean, we could talk all day long. Like, I actually understand why it was happening. Just said it can't happen on our block. But anyway, his mom does that. She says that being with us is making him more white. And then going to the school that he's going to is making him more white. And all he can see is that he's actually getting this rich opportunity that might prepare him for college. And so it is, and what is more white? This is and by the way, this is an internal conversation to the African American community. I'm sure it happens in Latinx communities as well. My cousins down south used to say I spoke white. And other people say I speak like I'm from the hood. And so anyway, it's an ongoing conversation.
Yeah.
And what that means and how we ensure that our children still have a sense of who they are in terms of their ethnicity and race.
Does racial assimilation come up in the research you do?
Not at all, honestly. I don't think that, so a lot of, we do a lot of local work in DC. And DC is a very choice-rich city. And so, students travel all over the city to attend school. I think in some schools, they're having the conversations about assimilation and sort of the influence of whiteness, but it isn't a part of any research that we're doing right now.
Yeah, and one reason for that is, of course, because 40% of kids of black children in DC attend charters. Next to New Orleans, I think it's one of the most charter-rich school systems.
That's the same percentage for my neighborhood, by the way. 40%.
But the traditional choice issue, and speaking more personally, we wanted our child in a bilingual immersion program. Well, we had to get in line at 4 a.m. in the morning in
to go get
November to get our kid into a lottery, let alone to the school.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, poor people can't afford to do that. So it's a limited choice.
Yeah.
And it still is in most cities. There's a question about how can we ever achieve housing as human rights if housing is used for for-profit and wealth building? And it's a great question because this is a capitalist country. This is a country that is, its economy is a capitalist economy.
Yeah.
It's about making money and making a profit. And going back to Richard's presentation, I mean, has it been the boogeyman in this whole thing? Or are we talking about an institutionalized, not just cultural, but I mean the fact that it's an economy that is always going to work against what many would consider a human right?
Yeah, that's why I loved, when Richard was speaking, did anybody hear me up here saying, I felt like I was in church. I wanted to say amen. But I think, so at the end of slavery, my ancestors were promised 40 acres and a mule, right? Never got that. And, the thought of, being enslaved for 200 some odd years, and then when it's over, it's just like, okay, bye, go out there, go make it. With the whole country having such an incredible head start, we have to, I love the idea of reparations. And I love that Marianne Williams, when she was in the presidential race, actually raised that up. And it is about, for me, not cutting a check, just, here, but to have like focused areas where we know the government was just straight up wrong. And actually bringing our capitalistic resources to bear on redressing that issue. And so when he talked about the government should buy $450,000 homes in the suburbs or inner ring suburbs, wherever, and then sell them to black and brown folks for $100,000, I think that is a brilliant idea. And right now, in fact, my husband and I live in an amazing house in North Minneapolis. I mean, just amazing. And since 2008, first of all, it was underpriced when we moved in. Right? And it is, hardwood, woodwork everywhere, stained glass. I mean, it's incredible. Anywhere else, it would be a $750,000 home. It's not in North Minneapolis. Not only is it not, but we are still underwater from 2008. Like if we were to sell tomorrow, there's nothing we're passing on to our children. And in fact, we call that the black tax for me as an African American wanting to live in a black neighborhood. And many of my friends are like, no, I got to have some return on my investment, and we know that the neighborhoods that we're in that got hit the worst because of exploitation in the name of capitalism. And so, you know, until we make it right by the people that we've so wronged, our country, it will continue to be an albatross around the neck of this country.
We want to start, I'd appreciate if someone at some point can remind me how much more time we have. Like, you know, give me the 10-minute, 5-minute thing. But I guess we're not there yet. I do want to start winding this down because I want to talk a little bit about what, again, Rothstein brought up, and that is the question of hope. The hope that things can change, will change.
Yeah.
And I want to ask you both whether you see that on the horizon, that, and to talk about it in the context of what would help folks here leave not depressed, but hopeful about the work they do and about the work we all need to do.
So, yeah, I would be happy to sort of take a pass at the question, and
that's not a good
not
sign.
to pass on it, but to take a swing. One of the things that I see out in the world is that community voice and lived experience is a huge influence on what we're talking about at the Urban Institute, how we're doing our research, what we're focusing on, what is being lifted up to gain our attention. That was not the case when I started at the Urban Institute 20 years ago. What we think is important and the kinds of voices that we want to raise or that, you know, that we realize we need to raise, let me put it that way, have changed completely. We are doing a lot more community engaged methods. We are changing who we hire and who is actually doing work in our organization. So I feel really hopeful that the influencers are changing and diversifying. And that's what gives me a lot of hope about what is coming.
So what do you see in the next 10 years?
I don't know what to think in terms of policy because we are in such a, I think we're in a really interesting time. But I am seeing young people in my organization using their experience and using their voice and using their identities to change the way that that we think about policy and that we think about practice.
Sondra?
Yeah, Frantz Fanon, an African philosopher, said that every generation out of relative obscurity must discover its mission, fulfill it or betray it. Discover its mission, fulfill it or betray it. And I think because of our current government and our current presidency, people never ever thought that the underbelly of America could be so vile and could raise its head up and impact more and more people. I think a lot of black folks weren't surprised, but a lot of my white friends couldn't believe what was happening to our country. And it's like, well, this is our country, you know, on steroids, but it is our country. And so the worst of times is actually the best of times, because it's kind of pulling, like where the scales are falling off our eyes around, I don't think anybody any longer is taking for granted that a democracy is not as much a government as it is a movement that needs to be worked out. Every generation needs to work it out. What are the areas of injustice and inequity? And how do I spend my short little teeny life making it better? And I'm so hopeful because I'm hopeful in the human spirit. And I'm talking about black folks and white folks and brown folks and rich and poor who are raising their heads up and running for office, and parents, my parents who are like going to the school board and saying, no, we need change and we need it now. The Federal Reserve is like, the leader of the Federal Reserve is making, has asked for a change to the Constitution of Minnesota, which was created in 1857, that said that today would say that it guarantees all students a quality education. Right now it just says a uniform system of public schools. But anyway, but I just see, and I see kids who are now within the Northside Achievement Zone, kids who are like now like truly believing, like I got a whole host of folks who believe I'm going to do something and I'm going to be somebody, and by God it I am. And so I am, we're incredible people. And I just believe, I see it happening. We're going to do this. And we need to be okay with our family and friends that don't come along with us, and other Americans that don't see it the way we do. We keep praying for them and hope that they will. I've never been more inspired than to find out recently that a third of the legislators during the signing of the Constitution walked out. A third of them didn't sign it. And I think about a third of our family members don't get it. About a third of our friends don't get it. About a third of America is never going to come along. And we need to be okay with that. And you just go, whether we're talking housing, we're talking education, we're talking about the stuff that around this housing, deseg, is so big. It is so monumental. And it's going to take everyday citizens like us here coming together and demanding change and putting our bodies into it. And I'm going to close, Claudio, with a quote. Maya Angelou said that love, this really is about love, right? It really is. That love will scale any building, and it will tear down any wall, and it will take on any army. And at the end, when it arrives at its destination, it will arrive there more filled with hope than when it began. Yeah.
And if it's not about love, then it's about economics, because regions that are more economically integrated are richer,
Yeah.
and do better and prosper more and grow more.
Combination of love and economics.
Love and economics.
Love and economics.
You both were reminding me of a conversation I had with members of the NAACP's Legal Defense and Education Fund some time ago, and talking about, will the racial dynamics of this country ever really change, since they're so historic and deeply rooted.
Deep.
And I remember often hearing, we're going to have to wait for that generation of segregationists to die out, and hope that young people, and you talked about young people coming along will understand the damage it did and the damage we can avoid by coming together, by finding common interests, a consensus on what's fair, on what's right. Do you see that? Do you see hope in young people today, even in this climate of toxicity in our conversations about race? Do either of you see hope in the young people you come across, black and white?
Yeah, no, I absolutely see hope, but the housing segregation and the, what's happening in our schools is actually really dangerous, though, in the psyche of young people, which might even make this generation more lethal than the previous one. So the segregationists, they planted seeds, and so on in terms of their children. But what they're seeing today, you have white kids there was one school in Minneapolis, and you mentioned this, Claudio, that you can have an integrated school, and my bonus son, from my husband who gifted me with a bonus son. But Andre was at a magnet school, and it was totally integrated. It was 50% white, 50% black in St. Paul. And all of the advanced classes were upstairs, and all the remedial classes were downstairs, or, not advanced, and special ed. And at lunchtime, all the white kids would go upstairs, and all the black kids would go downstairs. And there would be a couple black kids that would go upstairs. And so the white kids were just seeing this, right? And so it was kind of affirming all the stuff that they'd heard. Now, they might be playing basketball with the guys, and so they feel like, really, my best friend's black. We hoop together, right? But when I go to my advanced class, don't know where my friend went. And that in itself starts to seal in your psyche, whether we articulate it enough of I'm superior and that person has to be just inferior. And we're seeing it. I get scared of continuously talking about the achievement gap, that only 79% of black kids read at grade level and only 82%, as if we have a deficiency. And white kids hear it. They're hearing it. They're hearing white kids do so good. And unless we, the adults, have a different narrative around why what's happening is what's happening, the stereotypes will be more intense than ever.
I often do think, though, that the media reporters are often complicit in almost showcasing those divisions.
Yeah.
And seeing, whether it's on social media or anywhere else, these awful incidents in which white kids lash out at minority kids. And again, especially in this climate. But there is a more institutionalized, I think, problem. I was doing a story out of Richmond, Virginia about magnets. And white parents were up in arms because the teachers wanted to racially mix the classrooms. High-achieving kids all around. But the white parents said, I don't want my kid to be taught by a black teacher because I want a white teacher in my kid's classroom.
Wow.
I mean, you literally had, and these were people who felt, I'm bending over backwards to send my kid to a integrated school.
Right.
But it's hard, when it comes to that,
Right.
the teaching, or at least the instruction,
Yeah.
I want a white teacher.
Right.
I mean, you find that everywhere. The other place was Shaker Heights, Ohio, ground zero for a huge study on how you had an affluent black and white, racially integrated community just outside Cleveland, where you were still getting kids, black kids, go to class for the first time, and a white teacher saying, are you sure you're in the right classroom? Because this is an advanced placement.
Right.
That happens every day.
Every day.
So, I have more of a jaded view that white, or that young people in general, are really changing.
Yep.
Although I would like to believe that we're not back in the 40s and 50s. But that hasn't ameliorated the effect that racial attitudes has today.
Marcus came home the other day. He's in 11th grade at De La Salle, the Catholic high school I was telling you about, which is largely white, but enough black kids. And he was upset because he said some of his white classmates accused him of cheating on a test because he got the highest score. I mean, this is last week.
Yeah.
This is last week.
Yeah, we've veered a little bit away from maybe the, certainly questions that people have here about how they go forth and talk about the issues they've tackled on housing and working with other agencies, other communities, other folks to make sure that their work translates into more opportunities in terms of education and changing racial attitudes. Is there a question, here's a list of things I would like people here to do once they leave this conference. What are the 2 or 3 recommendations, if you have it, for folks to, user-friendly stuff that you would want people to leave this conference with?
I would suggest you look up your community in terms of how the neighborhood segregation aligns with the school segregation. You might be surprised, you might not be. We have a tool that you can use on the Urban Institute's website that allows you to look at whether you're kind of have higher neighborhood segregation and lower school segregation, or vice versa. One would expect that if housing created all of the segregation we see today, that you would have equal, right? But housing doesn't create all of the segregation we have today in schools. And so it's interesting to kind of look at your community in terms of those two data points. So I would encourage you to do that.
And I would, how many people saw Segregated by Design? Did you see that? So know your history and Google Segregated by Design. And it's free on the website. It is amazing. You gotta see it and then blast it out to as many people as you can, because understanding how we got where we are is critical. And now that's a national scope, and then find out the history of your city. In Minneapolis, there's a project by the city of Minneapolis and the University of Minnesota called Mapping Prejudice. And it looks at how, today 70% of white families own homes in Minneapolis, only 30% of them rent. And 70% of black folks rent in Minneapolis, and only 30% of them own, right? How did it get to be that way? This project of Mapping Prejudice really highlights it. And then find out what the policies are that you need to get your body involved in, And so in Minneapolis, there's a lot of projects that they're working on in terms of affordable housing, making sure that the affordable housing and the density of the projects that are around density are not just in North Minneapolis, but are spread throughout the city. There's been a lot of fighting about that, even though it did go through. And I think our mayor is cool, like he'll get elected again, I'm not quite sure, around how the affluent white families that opposed that move are actually gonna be, but know what the policies are, get involved. And we didn't talk about gentrification specifically. It is something that I think about often because our community is changing, and the very kids who are starting to succeed academically in our neighborhood because their parents are getting all the supports that I'm talking to you about, and the kids are in schools that we are supporting, many of their families can no longer afford to live in North Minneapolis, right? And so that there's tension around gentrification, and I do think affordable housing should be spread out, and I do love choice. Both things are true. And I'm just hoping that as you get more involved, you're willing to stand in the tension and allow the answers to our most seemingly intractable issues that they come to you.
We have about 5 more minutes left, and I would be remiss if I didn't get back to a point that Richard again made about the need for a new civil rights movement. Now, to me, though, as valid as that is, I see that as clearly a long-term issue that we can't get to unless we begin to chip away at some of the injustice built into housing, education. So how would you define a new civil rights movement? In fact, at one point, Richard said that the civil rights movement of the 60s kind of folded the tent and went home. I'm not so sure I would agree with that, but
yeah, sort of did.
What is a new civil rights movement that can begin to turn the tide and begin to help create justifiable and fair housing education policies? How do you do that? Who does it?
Yep. So we do, right? So we do. We are the judge who spoke at the beginning. I don't know if she's still here, but who said, we are the government. We choose our elected officials, and we dictate who stays, who goes. Some people have more power and doing all that. But anyway, but we do. And Claudio, I think it's both and to the degree. So it's not that's long term. It's both and. We work on ending housing segregation now. We work on high quality schools in every neighborhood now. We work on, fair income and jobs now. We work on all of that now. And I think to the degree that we're working on racial justice, that is, and whatever, and everybody's not, we all have different callings. We just do, around the aspect of the elephant that we're taking on. And I'm hoping that we can coalesce and bring our forces together, but know that when you're working for justice, that is our current civil rights movement. It absolutely is.
Megan, final comment?
From what I hear, many young people are really interested in one presidential candidate who really is putting forward a huge set of ideas and changes that I think could sort of, be thought of as a movement. But also, I would say looking at places like Minnesota, where based on so community organizations are informing state, state constitutional amendments. Enormous coalitions of people who work on the ground and know the communities that they're working in have come together to build that political will for political change. In addition, Minneapolis is a place where single-family housing has been
Sacrosanct.
Yeah, and
Sacred.
and is now a thing
Right.
of the past.
Right.
And so it is really a new way of thinking about how do we
Right.
integrate our communities, and what will it take, and what do we give up? Is it a little bit of space? Is it a big, green or brown lawn? So what is it that we're willing to give up? And so I think that's
There it is.
That's where I'd like to leave it.
There it is.
I know that if we didn't get to your question, feel free to approach Megan and Sondra and ask them yourselves. Otherwise, let's have a big round of applause